Hello, I'm Chris, the founder at Innerfit and the host for this conversation on why we need to reframe mental health to beat burnout and boost performance. We're going to jump straight into it. I'm sharing a few stats just to shape the conversation up before I go in with a few key questions to my roundtable guests, and we start sharing some practical tools, tactics, and ideas that you can take away to beat burnout and boost performance in your organization. Enjoy. You don't need me to tell you that burnout is prevalent. Some of these stats you may have seen before. The one on the left is essentially from a McKinsey & Company global study showing that 1 in 4 people right now are experiencing symptoms of burnout, often, very often, or always. In the UK, we know that 30 to 40% of people are experiencing high or extreme levels of stress, according to Mental Health UK. That's one of the reasons that retention in the UK, at least, is not as high as we want it to be. So that stat in the middle is from the CIPD, showing that 1 in 3 staff each year will leave. And in fact, the fact behind that is 59% of people actually cite mental health or wellbeing related factors as a reason for leaving a business. Particularly important amongst Gen Z. 61% of Gen Z now expect more than they did last year from their employer when it comes to workplace wellbeing. And the last stat on this page is around performance. So 4 in 5 managers right now, according to the Chartered Management Institute, are actually accidental managers. So people promoted on technical expertise without necessarily having the people and the soft skills to back that up. Another stat here from a global perspective is that 23% of employees, according to Gallup, are actually engaged. 77% therefore are not actively engaged day to day in the work they do. So that starts to paint a bit of a picture from the state of play for where we're at. I think this group in particular is tasked with addressing some of those big challenges. And we know the good news is that 3/4 of us in this room have tried creative ways to keep the conversation around mental health fresh. However, it still remains the fact that 45% of us are experiencing some level of mental health fatigue when it comes to pushing the agenda within our organizations. So without further ado, Nicole, I'll come to you first, if that's okay. I wanted to start the conversation off more broadly with what you're seeing on mental health. What types of conversation are you having? Have you seen any mental health fatigue kick in? And just overall, what are you seeing on mental health right now?
Okay, so I don't even know what I'm going to say specific to PMI. Obviously, PMI is a global company where, if anyone doesn't know, it's probably nearly 80,000 people globally, so there's a lot of us. But I think there's a couple of things. I think life for everyone has kind of gone back to being kind of crazy, as in pre-2020 days. But also with the hybrid working model, we're on screens the whole time. So the conversations I'm having with people is they're overworked, but I think primarily because they're literally staring at a screen all the time still. So it's trying to have conversations with people around how to manage that. The other thing, again, not specific to PMI, but in any corporate company, people managers are being made into people managers because they're great at their tech skills, not necessarily great at being people managers. So there's a big thing around ensuring that if you are a people manager, you've got the emotional intelligence skills, or you've got the human skills, which people often forget about. And luckily, we're doing quite a lot of that at Philip Morris to try and compensate that now. But I think we're working with people who are new to the business, like the Gen Zs, and then people who have been there 20, 30 years. And all those people are having to now work together a lot closer. If that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. Thank you, Nicole. So a piece around soft skills and recognizing that we're remote. We're working remote right now. I mean, thank you very much. If there was anything else you wanted to add on to the end of that, Nicole, please feel free. And then Victoria, over to you.
No, I just think people managers is a big point that links to the burnout and performance. So I remember my personal experience. I've left companies before primarily because of individuals who have been absolutely horrendous. And that's why I've left the company, not the company itself, it's individuals. So I think it's been very wary of, if people are in charge of teams and people, that we're equipping them with the right skills to be able to do that.
100%. Victoria, I don't know if you wanted to build on that point or more broadly look at mental health and what you're seeing.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, 100% I agree with Nicole's point. I think especially around managers that kind of end up shifting into leadership roles and then perhaps finding that it's not the right place for them, or kind of trying to find their feet, or perhaps even feeling imposter syndrome, things like that. Something that we try to do wherever possible, I mean, it's not always possible, but is to try and do things like trialing promotions. So giving them an opportunity to almost like test out that, feel it out first. Does this feel good? Is it the right fit for me? Because otherwise, if you've already kind of stepped straight into that role, the promotion's been announced, everybody's aware that you're now the manager, and then you have to reverse it, it can cause a lot of stress for that individual. They can become really nervous about, whether that was the right thing, whether they were good enough, when it might have just been that it just wasn't the type of role for them, and they're better in more of an individual contributor position. So yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Nicole said there. I think in the broader sort of scope of mental health, I think there is definitely fatigue setting in, and I think everybody feels that. And I think after COVID or during COVID, a lot of people suddenly started being like, okay, this is something that we really need to talk about. And it was so fantastic to see that companies were finally listening, like they were actually finally doing something about it. But it's about keeping that conversation going. And I think where I've seen the fatigue setting in is where if it feels like a trend, if it doesn't feel sincere, that's when employees and managers feel this fatigue, because they don't feel this sincerity in the work that they're doing. So I think what's really important is that it's in the behaviors of the company. It's not about, okay, what initiatives have you got in place? Are you doing yoga? Are you doing meditation? Are you kind of doing bits and pieces like that? It's really about what behaviors are matching what you're saying that you do and what you support. So are there open conversations and discussions around, if people are feeling overwhelmed or people are struggling? Are managers kind of modeling that healthy work-life balance? And are we creating an environment where people feel psychologically safe to talk about it when they're not feeling okay, to match the kind of initiatives that you also put in place? So that's kind of where I think the fatigue is setting in a little bit.
Thank you, Victoria. Lara, I know you'll have something, and Stevie, you'll have something to add on the psychological safety piece as well. But first, Danny, I know you are working with managers, employees on the ground as well. So I just wonder if you had anything to pick up from Victoria's comment about an element of fatigue kicking in, perhaps with some leaders as well. What are you seeing on the ground when you're talking to managers?
Yeah, it's there is definitely a bit of another mental health training coming up, but I think it's trying to educate in a way that says, actually, it's funny, I've titled myself as mental health and performance coach, but what I always say is actually mental health equals performance, but they're somehow seen on like a different end of a continuum. When we're talking about mental health, we're generally referring to mental ill health, and when we're talking about performance, it's like the other side of the continuum, and actually they're completely interlinked. I think I wrote a couple of little stats here that I'll very briefly so I keep my bits succinct. But psychological safety being a key driver, we know that, but there's a 43% leadership gap in people learning and culture, leaders saying that they lack skills and the awareness to create psychological safety. So people are saying that they've got fatigue, but they don't quite understand what the fatigue's about. And, whether it's, I did a mental health first aid training 10 years ago, and I haven't seen the benefits of that. It all gets bundled into one thing, which is what we're typically referring to as mental ill health. And I think when we can reframe that, instead of thinking about it as just surviving, on the other side of that, thriving, if we can see the bridge between those two, then it's mental health equals performance. And one other little thing that constantly, I've got like a little frequently asked questions from managers or sponsors in organizations. It's looking at the hidden metrics as well. So they go, right, we don't have these huge budgets to deal with mental ill health or mental health training. And then you go, well, what are your recruitment costs saying at the moment? And sometimes they're like completely different departments. You go, right, well, if you look at the last 10 people that left, why did they leave? The average cost from a recruitment company is 25% on a 100K salary. So that's 25 times that. No one's looking at those, not looking maybe aware or honestly at the hidden costs of mental ill health, right? So by educating in that department and saying, actually, we're trying to get people happy and healthy, which will inevitably lead to a better performance and return on investment. And I think it becomes less about fatigue and more about developing and building and growing the organization, ultimately for the shareholders at the top who want return on investment. That's what it boils down to. People, I think people in this room are very obviously interested and support positive well-being in organizations, but it's not always the case when you get to the very top of organizations. And it's, we earned this year, how do we develop that next year? And you sort of have to kind of be malleable around that vision and that ideal to get any of this work even going.
Thank you, Danny. I can see from the attendees as well, we've got a few people who have actually tried that as well, I think, in terms of talking about the bottom line impact to get that senior leadership buy-in and keep the conversation fresh, if we want to link it back to that. Folks, feel free to put in any questions or any facts or insights you've got yourselves. But next, I think, Lara, Stevie, you've definitely got something to add to this piece on mental health and performance, and perhaps the role of psychological safety too. So, Lara, if I could start with you, given you've also worked in a head of people role, what's your sense for where the conversation on mental health is right now, and how do you see the bridge between mental health and performance?
I think there definitely is potential that there is fatigue sort of kicking in, and like Victoria said, like post-COVID, everyone was really focusing on it. That was what everyone was, focusing on from all levels. And I think it can be difficult when, with well-being, there isn't one clear metric that everybody follows. And I think it's really difficult to get that kind of real consistent momentum across businesses and getting everyone following it and getting that kind of final output with sort of across businesses, senior leaders and things like that, when not everybody's following the same metric. So if you look at sustainability and something like that, everybody's like following the net zero target now, which is a really clear metric that everyone can get behind and everyone understand what that means. And then for their business, they can then do the little things that add up to that. Whereas like with mental health, I think it's much more difficult because it's so kind of complicated, because every organization operates in a different way, every individual operates in a different way, every company and leader has got to work out how to best make it best work for them. So it's kind of really difficult to kind of get that momentum. So it's easy to see how kind of like the trends and fads can happen and then kind of momentum can drop off. But I totally agree with you, Danny, that like I really believe that like I always like to think of it as mind health rather than mental health, because I think there's a lot of stigma around mental health, that people think of it as, negative mental ill health. And actually what we're fundamentally talking about is if your mind is healthy and it's operating as well as it can, then you can perform as well as you can. And if your mind is, if you've got, and I think there's kind of two impacts on that. You can have your kind of own personal resources and you can help top those up and make sure that you're kind of feeling more resilient and self-efficient and things like that. But a massive part of that is the environment that you're within and how you're being supported within the company and how they're supporting you. And I think both those things can play on your mind health and then determine whether you're then going to be performing well or performing negatively. And obviously when you're then performing well, you're going to be able to be more innovative, have better relationships with people, come up with more kind of ideas and broader thinking and things like that. Whereas potentially if you're going down the more negative side of things, then you're not feeling well in yourself, and you'll potentially have negative consequences on relationships and performance and things like that. So I 100% think there's a link between the two. And I do think that we just almost need to just look at it as, I don't know, I kind of almost look at it as like a marathon runner, for example. You don't push the marathon runner to run a marathon every single day. You focus on supporting the environment and his own personal capabilities to train him up to kind of get to the point of running a marathon. So for me, it's like when you're in the workplace, you shouldn't constantly be pushing people to be efficient 100% all the time, because it's just not going to work, and people are going to burn out at some point. You've got to make sure that you're putting those things in place so people can sustain it and keep going for the long run, and they've got that time to recharge and fill up their batteries and go again and things like that. So I'll stop talking. I've talked for quite a lot now, so I'll hand over to someone else.
That's great. We'll hand you across to Stevie, and I'm sure, well, Stevie, I know for a fact you've got lived experience linking to what Lara said. So over to you. You've got the advantage and disadvantage of being the last one to contribute.
Oh, no, yeah. Good effort. Thanks for everyone being on the call, and grateful to be speaking to people that actually are looking for the best way to translate the message and be with the message. I think that's a big thing. And as Lara said there, like, we're looking at positioning, how can we get people to get on board with it, with mental health and with performance. I think that people, obviously, there's a way to investigate this and bring it as a possibility, but to ask the question, why does mental health put you off? What's the reasons for that? Why do we feel allergic to that word? It's just a word, but also if we go under the hood with that, there's stuff going on within us that diverts away from that. And I came from a sport that was totally, rugby league is a northern British game, very brutal, heavy contact game. And I got to a point when I was 22 and I'd won all the stuff I'd wanted to win pretty much and being the person I wanted to become. And but also I had loads of injuries and I got to around the point I was like, what is this mental health thing? What are we doing? Why do we speak about it? And because functionally, this is the thing that brings teams together. This is the thing that helps us to perform. This is the thing that actually is our experience of the world. And I guess judging or thinking about that question to people, what is it that puts you off about the word mental health? For me, I think if we start really close in, something that I wish I'd have done back when I was 22, 23 and still playing, is to understand fundamentally there's a lack of safety within ourselves, but also in the group, which pretty much is fear. Fundamentally, that's what we feel. And when I work with leaders now, it's actually getting people to understand subjectively or objectively, there's a feeling, there's an emotion that comes up in your body whenever you're asked to go and speak to a CEO or a head coach. You feel the fear, which is not an issue, but the issue is how we try and control things after that. This place of authenticity, this place of well-being, how we sort of pour over that and start controlling. And then I think that is pretty much a symptom of us not really being well in ourselves. And then we have the signs of people pleasing, we have the signs of perfectionism, we have the signs of control, coercion, conformity. And it all takes us away. And I think that gap, that place that we get in, where we are controlling, is where we end up burning out because we're not fully within ourselves, we're not fully in who we are. So the way that I look at it is to sort of investigate that fear, investigate why we don't quite feel safe, the evolution drive to become, am I safe here? Can I make a mistake? Do I have a future with these people? Can I tell the truth? And can I give everything, which is ultimately what we all want for performance, is people giving everything. And usually there's a lot of things environmentally and internally that's standing in the way of that. So for me, whether it's a rugby league field or it's a boardroom, we have to be open and go through a sort of route of acceptance that this is real, this is the thing that we're talking about, this is all for all of us as human beings. We need to be vulnerable with that and feel that uncertainty, risk and emotional exposure. And then all that's left is to fully be us. And I think that's the closest place I can get to in terms of what we can do about it and change the way we speak about it.
I thought Stevie was pausing.
No, that's fine.
So, yeah.
Sorry, Stevie, you paused right at the end there. I think you left it on a profound note of
We thought it was a dramatic pause, mate. We were all on the edge of our seats.
I meant that. I programmed that in before I started the call.
But no, I think, thank you, Stevie. I'm not surprised that we ended in a kind of reflective place, because if you know Stevie, you'll know that he's an introspective guy, but also insightful in the sense of, I guess everyone on this call to an extent will want to pause after this, and my hope is that everyone takes at least one thing that they can either apply or experiment with in their own organization, which is now where we're going to shift the focus of this call away from where is mental health and how does it link to performance, into actually just some tangible examples, tools, tactics, and even just mini case studies or success stories we've had of beating burnout and boosting performance in the workplace. And at this point, I should also say, folks, please feel free to put anything in the chat if you've had something work really well. We're going to go to a Q&A in about 10 minutes. But Stephen, for example, and Richard, you've both just touched on the corporate athlete and the sporting metaphor to win senior leadership buy-in. So that could be an example of a specific tool or tactic you've used. There are many, many more. So I'll open the conversation back up, and we'll go in a slightly different Lara, I wonder if you wanted to kick this one off first. Any specific things that you've seen really work, either in your previous role as head of people or more recently as a business psychologist, and what you've heard work well at other organizations?
I think for me, it's that point about creating that psychological safety and that creating that environment where people feel safe to kind of be themselves, be vulnerable, feel safe to speak up, come into work and just perform at their best and do their thing without any judgment is a key thing. But I mean, I think it's really difficult to say, you say to people, help people become psychologically safe, but it's really difficult because you're kind of creating, it's kind of like creating a little bit of magic. It's like creating that environment and that culture that you're kind of creating. It's not like a specific thing that you can do and tick the box and great, we've done psychological safety. It's like, it's something day in, day out, people need to be conscious of, and they need to, you need to sort of understand the impact of just things like, how your behavior, the words that you use, how you come across, just listening in meetings. And I think to your point, Nicole, about being in back-to-back meetings these days, I think it's really like this, people aren't necessarily as present as they were before. When you used to go into work, you used to go into a meeting and you were in that meeting, whereas now you're in a meeting, you're on your screen, you've got your phone buzzing, you've got so many different channels coming at you, you've got so many things going on, people just aren't necessarily as focused. So I think it's about like really making sure that people are active listening, people are making sure that people are bringing people into the conversations, allowing people to be heard, allowing people to say things and make mistakes. And a big thing I'd say is, and this is a thing that I learned in my previous role actually, is not coming into, I think a lot of the time people who suffer things from burnout and things like that push themselves almost too hard. They're almost working too much and too hard. And a lot of the time it's trying to make people feel that it's actually okay to maybe put in like 80% rather than the full 100%, and come to meetings not having to do everything 100% perfectly, because ultimately you want people to build on ideas and input on things and make things kind of like come together. So it's not just sort of like one person's idea, it's like built as one, as a team. So I think it's making people feel that, yeah, it's okay that you can come with 80% and let the team build the rest together, rather than thinking, oh gosh, I've got to do everything perfectly, it's got to be 100% right. And then people are then like panicking and spending too much time and overworking and all that kind of stuff, which then leads into burnout and mental health issues further down the line. So it's, I think, yeah, as a leader, it's kind of trying to create that environment which allows people to feel that they can come to work and be their authentic self, and show and try and work out what everyone's best strengths are, and try and get people to bring those to light and to focus on those. I guess would be my thing. So yeah, psychological safety, but what does that really mean? Yeah, giving people like the tangible tools to really understand like how to create that environment within a workplace. And it's something that you kind of need to think about every day, really. It's not just like, right, we've done psychological safety, let's move on. It's every day you need to be thinking about how you're coming across, how you're managing, how you're leading, and what impact that's going to have on the team below you.
So Nicole, how do you mentioned soft skills prior to that, how do you do
human
that?
skills, not soft. Yeah, human skills. Okay, so I guess in the corporate world, we're doing all the things that I hope a lot of the large corporate organizations are doing now. So we're now training all our new people managers across the globe in a 6-month program, touching on a lot of these, starting with self-awareness. So you've got to be very self-aware before you're very good at we can manage people. So that covers that. We're just rolling out like a leader as coach product. So, equipping people managers with coaching conversation skills, hugely important. Again, a skill that everyone could elevate. And also we've got the wellbeing champions, which are globally now. So everyone's doing their own little individual initiatives with their markets, just trying to encourage people to think more about well-being. But I guess personally, when I'm having conversations with well-being conversations, or even with coaching conversations, the main thing that comes up that we talk about and people want to focus on actually is just, we go back to fundamentals, the basics. And I think Lara touched on this a few minutes ago, in the first conversation, is, are you resting? Are you sleeping properly? What are you eating? Are you getting enough exercise? Because all of that, and are you drinking enough water a day? Those simple things then link to our cognitive function. So, it's going to enhance your thinking, your reasoning, your decision making, your problem solving, all the skills that we need day to day in a work environment. So if you get the basics right, that helps you deal with some of these things that life and work throw at you, like on a daily basis. So a lot of those conversations I'm finding myself in coaching, and also just filling up your me bucket. So I was in a conversation recently, and new mom back to work, found wanted to have a coach conversation, and we were like, so what are you focusing on now? She's like, oh, I want to be really good back at my job. I've lost out a year. I'm a new mom. I was like, well, what about you? And she was totally identifying herself with work and being a mom, and totally forgetting to focus on herself. And that was a kind of a revelation to her. But it's these simple things that we just need to remember, that you be the center of everything that you're in. Don't identify yourself with work, or whatever role you have to play, you're kind of in the middle. And then you can align with the rest of them and kind of step back and have agency for yourself and your own well-being.
Thank you, Nicole. Danny, I wonder if you have something on the coaching piece Nicole alluded to there, and agency, for example.
Yeah, it's a nice thing. I was listening intently to all what that you were saying there, Nicole, and Lara, actually, because I like this idea of back to basics. I think sometimes us being perhaps a little bit more advanced in our awareness, knowledge, literacy, we can be a few steps ahead. And it's the amount of people that I've heard use I'm so stressed, or I'm really burnt out at the moment. You go, what? Describe that to me. What does that actually mean? And they don't know. So we sort of go back, and I guess the three little things I was thinking of, and I will tie in with this idea of agency, is back to basics and going back to some of the definitions. Sometimes when we're talking about this kind of training mental health fatigue, I was just thinking as Stevie was speaking, and I was thinking, as an athlete, could you imagine if they go and train, and one day they're doing passing, one day they're, I don't know, doing dribbling, whatever the sport is, but actually they go, oh, I'm bored of that now. They would never come in and just go, I'm just bored of training. I've just had enough of training, because we don't see it as all these little components that comprise of the wider well-being. And that's what they all are when we're talking about psychological safety, emotional literacy. They are all components that contribute. But agency, from a therapeutic perspective, was one of Carl Rogers's fundamental 3 principles. It was unconditional positive regard, empathy, and this sense of agency, which is the person knowing that they have what it takes within them to get better. And without that, people don't believe that they can get better, because they're not doing it for themselves. It's being sort of trainer led. But just very quickly, 3 things that I think I've noticed recently that work really, really well, if I can just impart those. Having a senior sponsor, having someone high up in the organization that people listen to, saying, listen, we are taking this seriously, and I want to lead by example. I want to maybe share a personal story, exemplifying psychological safety, and saying, hey, I'm sharing with you, it's not a therapeutic space, but that can really have a knock-on effect down the pyramid of change. Again, not assuming that people know everything, going back to basics in what we're teaching people and how we're teaching people. Keep it very interactive, keep it fun. I think the fatigue that people refer to is actually slideshow fatigue. It's PowerPoint fatigue that people are talking about. Necessarily, if you get people up and playing and interacting, they're not fatigued anymore. And the final thing is ask people. Chris and I, when we're delivering various training, at the end of each session, we will give people sort of a Q&A at the end, or a QR code that says, look, here are 3 or 4 prevalent things at the moment that the organizations are benefiting from. What would you like to learn about next month? And giving them the space. Again, this comes back to agency, letting them choose what do they want to learn next month, rather than having a 12-month program set out that might not adjust to global politics or events correctly, you know, so month by month saying, what do you want to learn next week or in a couple of months? And we have had, you know, I'm quite proud to say, organizations tell us that we have had the highest attendance, you know, in 5 years to events that we've put on. So, you know, ask people what they want to learn about and cater for that, rather than trying to provide a, you know, have a framework for an annual wellbeing strategy, but know that it's movable because it's dynamic. People are, you know, dealing with different things at different times. So you can master that, you're in a good place.
Yeah, pertinent, because I guess a lot of people on the call, by the way, are either in a learning or HR position. So looking at next year, what are we actually going to be programming? Stevie and then Victoria. Stevie, we'll leave Danny's imagined sports training scenario alone. But would you have anything else in terms of success stories or something you've seen really make a shift when it comes to burnout or performance?
Yeah, I've had an interesting sort of scenario doing an Exco leadership program with a company who, you know, wanted his team to be more agile, have more freedom, more flexibility in thinking, and want to be on the front foot, really. And going into the fall, delivering the session, I knew that obviously there would be conversations around how everyone's being, but also how the leader's being, you know, like, because I think a lot of it is the team is a reflection of the leader. And I think it's really, really important to sort of know that and understand that. And one point that I want to make, I guess, is realizing that I think at work, especially, you know, the more and more I've come into the workplace, if you like, it's not the rugby field, we think that intensity is being 100% all the time, doing all these things, doing this, doing that, doing the next call, you know, getting to this meeting, and that's what we think intensity is. But it was fascinating to understand that the Latin root of intensity comes from the word intensus, which is depth of feeling, which was just fascinating for me, that to realize that actually there's more to intensity than we sort of go towards that meets the eye. And so going on to that point, working with the CEO, you realise that just building on the scenario that I spoke about before, about the fear and then what happens with the control is him in front of the full Exco team having insight. That's where I am, and openly, vulnerably voicing, yeah, I'm in fear of being judged quite a lot of the time, actually. You know, I'm in fear of being judged if I don't speak to someone enough. I'm in fear of being judged if I get this wrong. And all of a sudden, leader allowed the full team from that to give their own intensity to the circle. And that's the Exco team. So that's pretty much thereabouts the top of the tree in everyday working life. So I think there's an integral part about leadership here and how they approach it and how they work for. And also, we could be on this call and we could be talking about mental health and performance all day. But to realise that actually there will be some pain, there will be some suffering along the way. I think it's just how we respond to that and how we see that as a group, and how we support people through that, which ultimately is going to come in the way between the ultimate high performance that we want, and building on that, if that makes sense. So yeah, just some incredible conversations with an Exco leadership team where 2 hours, 3 hours in, we sat on the floor. Funny enough, we've done some activity, done some sort of like movement, some breath work, and from 2 sessions actually, their ability to feel what they're feeling, to actually feel what they're feeling, and voice that, which is just pretty much truth. How much that elevates whatever they're doing in the company, which I think is mental health and performance all rolled into one, to be honest. So yeah, I think it's quite a snowball of stuff there, but I hope it made some sense.
Thank you, Stevie. Linking the mental health and performance and building on in a sustainable way, actually, which I think was interesting. Just as I go to Victoria to share any final thoughts, I'm just going to share a quick Slido link. If you did have questions, feel free to just put your hand up, raise hand here, And what I'll do before finishing up the session is actually ask a quick question about whether you'd like to join one in future. But Victoria, over to you. Any last thoughts?
Yeah, it's hard to follow after all those great ideas. But I think what I would say is, working in a tech company with an ever-changing market, as I'm sure some of you experience, it's the real challenge can sometimes be, okay, when people are becoming burnt out, obviously you always hear, okay, we need to add more resource, we need to add more people, we need to expand our team, invest in bringing more people, but sometimes those budgets aren't there. So, and that can be really challenging because it's like, okay, we physically can't add more people. So I think what's really important from a business perspective is it's about kind of really reflecting on why are people becoming burnt out and getting to that point where before this actually happens. Why is this happening so often? What can we do to change that? But it's also about understanding the individuals, because kind of going back a little bit to Stevie's point earlier around authenticity and people feeling that they're doing what they want to be doing. It's about creating that sense of purpose and that kind of sense of belonging. And I think if people feel that what they're doing is truly where they're supposed to be, what they're passionate about, what they enjoy doing, and we're giving them that space and that support to do that, then I think you don't reach that sense of burnout. I mean, you can kind of recognize when you're needing to take some self-care and things like that. But when you're truly excited and feeling in alignment with where you're supposed to be, that burnout just doesn't come so easily. That burnout, I think, happens when you feel disaligned with where you're supposed to be and what you're supposed to be doing. So I would say it's really about kind of creating that support for the individuals and leaning into what are their strengths and weaknesses, what do they want to be doing, and kind of creating support networks around with peers, and having that open communication where people feel safe to say, you know what, I'm actually really struggling, and then the business taking that step back to be like, right, why are people feeling this way, what can we do to make that difference, and kind of getting right down to the core before we get to that point. So I know we're on time, so I'm going to stop talking now.
Brilliant. Thank you, Victoria, Lara, Danny, Nicole, and Stevie for sharing your insights today. I hope everyone's got at least one useful thing they can take away and apply. Have a wonderful afternoon.